I'm Hugh Hewitt, back inside the Beltway at the Relief Factor studio of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Glad to be there. We've got 90% of the studio's problems fixed. Xfinity brought me a new modem yesterday and put that into the studio, and it's up and running, but it requires quite a lot of backup stuff, so not everything's perfect. Bear with us for a couple of days. I can't print anything. Doesn't matter. The news is the news. Only one new poll came out yesterday, some Trafalgar polls. And they're very interesting because they're Michigan. In Michigan, Trump leads Harris by 2 points. Now, that's astonishing because Trump underpolls. And in the Slotkin-Rogers Senate race, and we want Mike Rogers in the Senate. We need Mike Rogers in the Senate. Mike Rogers, Army lieutenant, FBI agent, former head of the House Intel Committee, serious man, center-right guy, very, very good senator. Elise Slotkin, disappointing every Democrat she's met. Slotkin is up by 1 point, allegedly. Now, New York Times says 15 million people have already voted. That includes me. Yesterday, I told you that after the program, I would go and cast my vote for Donald Trump and JD Vance, and I did so. And I also got a chance to vote for Hung Cao. And I wrote most of my new Fox News column about the United States Senate and the various candidates who are running on the Republican side. They have 11 competitive seats. They are running 6 veterans. They are running 2 naturalized citizens, one of whom I'll be with tonight, Bernie Moreno, along with Mike Gallagher in Ohio at the Genoa Christian Church outside of Columbus. If you want to come and get a ticket to that, head over to battlegroundtour.com. We'll be there. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And always a great time being in Columbus, Ohio. And always good to be with Bernie, whether it's virtually or in person. Then I'll come back to the Beltway for the show on Thursday, and I'll be back then to Philadelphia with Dave McCormick and gang, and Mike Gallagher again, Chris DeGaulle on Thursday night. So on Friday, Dwayne will be in, although I've got the Hillsdale dialogue. I've got a way to figure out to get that pre-recorded and drop it in for you in its regular slot, the last radio hour of the week. The headline today is that, well, there are 2 that matter. The pollsters believe, this is from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal reports, pollsters blew it in 2020. Will they be wrong again in 2024? The answer is almost certainly yes. Why? It's not because they don't want to be right. They all want to be IBD tip. They all want to be tip because tip has the best reputation. That means they get the most clients for everything in the private sector. That means they get everybody calling them up and asking them to do polling work for their firm. You want to be right, but figuring out who's going to turn out is a nightmare, especially in the COVID year. So we really don't know who's going to be right. But I do know that Trump was underpolled in 2016 and underpolled in 2020. So the assumption, could be wrong, is that they won't find his voters again. So when you see that he's up by 2 in Michigan, according to Trafalgar, maybe he's up by 5. You know, he's evenly divided, according to the Arab American Institute, among Arab American voters, 42-41, with Trump ahead by the 1 point, which doesn't mean anything in a poll that far out. I'm just telling you, we can't believe any polls. Get out and vote. 15 million people have done so. In North Carolina, the early voting in North Carolina is evenly split between Republican and Democrat. Evenly split. In Nevada, according to John Ralston, who used to be on the show, but then John got a little bit crazy with Adam Laxalt and just became a left-winger. So I stopped having John on because, I don't mind having left-wingers on. I don't like rude left-wingers, and John became rude. So I said, okay, see you later. But John is on X, and he posted yesterday, Republicans have an 8,000 vote advantage in the early voting in Nevada, and they need a Clark County margin before voting begins on the final day of election season, November 5. Now, the story I want to tell you about, first of all, Israel is pounding Beirut overnight, and they have destroyed the 24 branches of Hezbollah's bank. There's $500 million in gold, by the way, beneath the Beirut hospital. And you can count on the Israelis getting that gold or destroying it because they're not in the business of allowing Hezbollah to be liquid now that they've attacked. And for a year and a week, they've attacked Israel. and now they've attacked the Prime Minister Netanyahu's home and his wife, and they're done with it. They destroyed 70% of Hezbollah's missiles. 2,000 of their senior fighters have been killed. When they go to war, and they have thoroughly penetrated Hezbollah. I think they've thoroughly penetrated Iran. We'll see when they hit Iran. But the big story of the morning is in the Washington Post, and it's co-authored by three fine reporters, one of whom Leanne Caldwell I've worked with, but they miss the story. Headline, Washington Post: Republicans lean into anti-transgender message in closing weeks. Now, Leanne and her colleagues do not pick the headline, but they do write the opening. GOP candidates are attacking transgender rights in swing states as a part of a final pitch to voters. Quote, Donald Trump and other GOP candidates are increasingly targeting transgender people in the election's closing days, invoking them as a boogeyman at rallies and pouring millions into advertising tying Democrats to transgender rights. Now, this is a choice. It's an editorial choice, and I think it's a bad editorial choice. The choice is, are we going to say what the Republicans are really saying, or are we going to try and shoehorn it into the left-wing narrative? And they went with the left-wing narrative, which is that the GOP is anti-transgender right. I don't often talk about transgender issues because mom and dad, this is early in the program, but mom and dad are usually driving kids to school before they go to work. And I do not want to introduce subjects that the parents don't want to talk about in the car. But this isn't about transgender issues. I have nothing but compassion for youngsters going through gender dysphoria. I don't think it's at all uncommon. I think that social contagion also has marked the last couple of years where it became kind of a thing among young women and young boys to draw attention to themselves by deciding that they were going to be girls or boys. And it's always been there. There have always been a very tiny percentage of people. That's not what the issue is. That's really not. It's not about transgender rights. Not about transgender adults at all. It's about girls and women's sports and girls and women's bathrooms and locker rooms. And mostly it's about girls' sports. There are so few transgendered women who are men who chose to become women, or boys who think of themselves as girls. They're minors, so they really can't make that decision. But they want to compete in girls' sports. Now, occasionally you hear a horror story like Kamala saying that she wants to pay for transgender surgery of men in California prisons, and that's a nutty issue that she adopted in 2019. We should not be doing that. Men who commit crimes go to jail as men. They should stay men. It's not medical treatment that the taxpayer should pay for. Now, the key, though, is sports. We want girls' sports to thrive, and they have. Since Richard Nixon signed Title IX in 1972, girls' sports took off. I like to talk with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and her age cohort about the early attempts to bring sports to girls in the 70s in high school. There weren't many. There was some field hockey. Private girls' schools always had field hockey, but not public schools. They played a little bit of volleyball, and they ran a couple of laps. They did calisthenics, but they weren't playing football, basketball, baseball. They didn't have swimming. They didn't have water polo, none of that stuff. That's all because of Title IX. And colleges did the same thing. We have a women's basketball association. We have Caitlin Clark. We have all these great women athletes at the Olympics because of Title IX. And you know what? Across the country, there are millions and millions of young girls who are playing sports. And their mothers and their fathers and their brothers and their sisters and their coaches and their families and their friends want them to compete to the best that they can, and they want them to excel to the extent that they can. The Flash ran a 5K this week, and the Flash did very well. The Flash is always good, one of my grandsons. But I want my granddaughters, when they compete, and my oldest one, the Scholar, swims. I want her to compete against other girls. I don't want her to compete against boys unless they are having a mixed medley. They used to do that all the time, mixed medleys. And it's not up to kids to decide that they want the medals more than the girls want the medals, and therefore they're going to become a transgender girl. That's the issue. And if you agree with me that we ought to protect girls' sports and women's sports from transgender women and transgender girls and the locker rooms of girls and women, you will vote GOP down the line. Coaches, parents, down the line, from Donald Trump all the way down. Yesterday, I got out to vote early. I sent Harley a picture of both my voting station, and there's my ballot marked out for Donald Trump and JD Vance. There's not much on a Virginia ballot. City council and county races and a constitutional amendment, which I favor. But there's also hung cow, and I voted for hung cow, and there's a chance. Because if they ever awarded Senate seats on merit plus diversity, hung cow, a refugee from Vietnam as a child who first went to West Africa, then came to the United States as a youngster, went to the United States Naval Academy, became Special Forces officer in explosive ordnance disposal. Hung cow is one tough and appealing candidate. And Glenn Youngkin and he have been working this state, as has Donald Trump. Virginia is light blue, and it's just possible they've had enough, and they don't want Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, by the way, was at Detroit yesterday. She's so bad at this. I mean, she's really so bad at this. Maria Shriver gets off to the bad start. Cut number 10. One of the old line Democrats are trying to offset Bobby Kennedy's appeal. It's not working. Cut number 10, Maria Shriver says this.
You're not, unfortunately. We have some predetermined questions, and hopefully I'll be able to ask some of the questions that might be in your head. I hope so.
Yeah, right. You just don't want Kamala to answer any questions that haven't been vetted. Kamala, my favorite, the cringiest moment of a lot of cringy moment is cut number 12. Here is Kamala.
I'll tell you, and I know this is a controversial topic for many of us, I love Gen Z. Because we have Gen Zs in our lives. We have kids who are Gen Zs. It can be complicated, I know. I love Gen Z.
I love Gen Z. Honest to goodness, does anyone, have they forgot the art of pandering? You don't call someone Gen Z. You talk about young voters out there. If you're looking forward to a future of employment and opportunity, I am your woman. And then you perhaps talk about something. But I love Gen Z. They don't care if you love them. They want to know whether they're going to have a job, whether or not their country is going to be safe, whether the towns in which they choose to live are going to be crime-ridden. They care about the same thing. Look, nobody is alike. There is no Gen Z. There are age cohorts that move through that have different experiences because they're born online, for example. It's the digital generation. They're online babies, but they're not the first ones who come of age, having always grown up online. The generation ahead of them have done that. But it's so cringy. Ugh, really, such a terrible candidate. Coming up after the break, I'm going to replay the interview I did at the end of yesterday's show with JD Vance for those of you who are early risers and early drivers to work. I think of my WGAN audience who doesn't ever get to hear the third hour, and I want my Portland and New Hampshire listeners on 98.5 FM News Talk and 560 AM. I want you to be able to hear what JD Vance had to say yesterday, because it apparently is the case that New Hampshire is actually in play. If you look at some of the models show a landslide for Donald Trump. I don't believe it. I don't believe anybody actually has any idea what's going to happen. I don't think it's a toss-up. I just don't think anybody knows. It could be a landslide for Trump. It could be a landslide for Harris. Nobody knows. It's just not possible to model that which has never happened before. And a returning president versus a non-elected nominee. She doesn't have a single vote. She never got to the 2019-2020 starting line. She's never won a vote outside of California. Impossible to predict. But I do want to check the markets, brought to you by our friends at AmericanFederal.com. AmFed is the expert here. And sure enough, yesterday's numbers, mixed market, Dow was down 344 points, but the NASDAQ was up 50. Gold kept marching north. Gold went up to $2,747 an ounce. If you want to buy gold or you want to sell gold today, you call Nick Rovich and his team at American Federal. 800-221-7694. 800-221-7694. There's no one like Nick. There's no one like his team. All the other gold people are trying to sell you something besides gold, especially collectibles. Nick is in the business. Do you want a quarter ounce, a half ounce, an ounce? Do you want 5 ounces? You want 10 ounces? You want a gold bullion bar? Whatever it is, he can take care of you, and he makes his money with a commission on the sale or the purchase of your gold. And it's a very straightforward group of people. So call him at 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. Yesterday I had a chance to talk with Senator JD Vance. Here is that interview from yesterday. Morning, Senator. How are you?
Good, Hugh. How are you?
I am great. In fact, after today's program, I will be walking over to the early voting station in Virginia and cast my ballot for Donald Trump and JD Vance. It's a bit surreal, Senator, and it must be for you. Do you pinch yourself every now and then, or when you're fishing with the ruthless guys and say, this is actually happening?
I pinch myself every day, Hugh, and in particular when people send me their ballots with of course, my name on it and President Trump's name on it. It's a pretty crazy feeling. I just try to enjoy it and do what I can to make sure we win, Hugh, which, frankly, right now I feel like we're in a very good spot.
I do, too. I want to get to the politics in a moment. I want to start with breaking news, though. Last night, Reuters reported the United States is investigating the leak of a pair of highly classified intelligence documents describing Israel's preparations for a retaliatory strike on Iran, House Speaker Mike Johnson said on Sunday. The documents appear to have been prepared by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, describing U.S. interpretations of Israeli Air Force and Navy planning based on satellite imagery from October 15th and 16th. Senator, that's treason. What will be your advice to President Trump if he becomes the 47th president on pursuing the perpetrators of that?
Well, we have to investigate it aggressively, Hugh. I mean, you're right that it's treason. There's a lot that we don't know. We don't know how big the leak was. We don't know, of course, when you have leaks like this and the documents that have been taken or been revealed, there are also probably documents that we don't know about that might be included in the leak. And so we have to be very focused on understanding fully the extent of the intelligence breach. You probably have across various agencies hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who have access to these documents. So it's going to take some time, I think, to identify who did it. But we have to be really aggressive about this stuff, Hugh. I mean, some of this intelligence that gets collected, whether from ourselves or our allies, it comes from painstaking work, dangerous work. I mean, sometimes people lose their lives in order to get us this stuff. And if we don't protect it, then we're not going to have much national security.
Jonathan Pollard spent 27 years in federal prison, rightly, because he was spying for Israel. This isn't a question about being pro-Israel or anti. It's a question about, if you take the oath, you cannot leak our material to the world because you don't like Israel. And I want someone to really take it to the max, make sure he gets prosecuted the way that they've gone after Donald Trump wrongly, to the full extent of the law.
Look, Hugh, I agree with you, and I think that we have to do that. We have to identify who did it and hopefully prosecute them to the full extent of the law. I think it also illustrates how increasingly within the bureaucracy of our government, Hugh, you have people who think of themselves as independent actors pursuing their own policy. I mean, you put it very well. Whether you're pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro any country or anti any country, you have to be pro the United States of America. And the most important part of that is actually following the political leadership as they drive American public policy. Your job is to help implement that policy, direct that policy, gather intelligence for that policy. Your job is not to conduct diplomacy yourself by leaking intelligence that is going to be harmful or helpful to one party or another. So,
and we need to deter
it.
Yeah, we need to deter. Yeah. Now, Senator, I want to get to the question that you were trying to answer when either Margaret Brennan or CBS cut off your mic. Well done in the vice presidential debate, by the way. But you were talking about TPS. I honestly don't know how 20,000 Haitians end up in Springfield. What is your understanding, and what were you trying to explain to the American people about TPS when your mic was cut off?
Well, it's TPS and mass parole, Hugh. So first of all, the move that Democrats make when they're talking about these mass parolees, and of course there are a lot of Haitians in that group, but a lot of other nationalities as well, is they'll say, well, these folks are legal, right? And when you hear legal immigrant, what you think, of course, is a person who came here, paid the fees, spent 10 years getting everything processed, got a green card, and then eventually became an American citizen. And that is just not what's going on here. In fact, courts, I think, are going to consistently find that Kamala Harris's mass parole program is illegal. They use things like the CBP One app to grant parole at an industrial scale, when really what parole is there for is for the president to be able to make case-by-case exceptions to American immigration law. To say that these folks are legal immigrants because Kamala Harris violated the law to grant them legal status, it's just preposterous, and we have to push back against what I think is an Orwellian inversion of immigration language.
Now, the trend line is that if we have a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz administration, the problem of the last 3.5 years will more than double, because that's what happened with her and Biden following former President Trump. Do you expect, is that fair to say, if you don't like what happened, expect twice as much of it in the next 4 years?
Yeah, twice as much or 3 times as much. I mean, look, on the immigration stuff, you're seeing this already where the media is trying to say that illegal border crossings are down, and that's actually not true. What's happening is they're shifting from illegal border crossings at the southern border to facilitated mass parole coming in through the ports of entry, through airports into our country. So these guys are actually taking Kamala Harris's open border, they're giving it technological sophistication and scale, and you think this isn't going to get much worse during Kamala Harris's administration. I think you're lying to yourself. Everything that's gone wrong, it's going to get so much worse, and that's particularly true when it comes to the green energy stuff, which has caused a lot of the inflation. It's just bad news, and that's the message that we're trying to carry in these final 2 weeks.
Senator Vance, I want to turn also to the Washington Post front page this morning, a story, the headline of which is, "Housing costs are rising everywhere, but especially in the swing states." What's remarkable about this story is that they do not do what Elon Musk did over the weekend, detail the regulatory burden on home builders. He was talking about the regulatory burden on SpaceX, but it's 3 times as much for a home builder in California. Federal level, you got the EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, the state, Cal EPA, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, Regional Water Quality Control Board, then the local stuff. Do you think the federal government can somehow reduce the regulatory burden to lower the cost of getting a home?
Well, I think that we can. Of course, some of these regulations cut across interstate commerce, Hugh, and that's something the federal government has obviously very direct authority over. I think some of this stuff goes back to NEPA, various federal environmental regulations. And then, of course, a lot of this is driven by energy, meaning if energy is more expensive, then the cost of building a home is going to be more expensive. That, of course, gets passed on to consumers. I think we're all talking, of course, about supply issues, Hugh, and that is a big part of the problem is we're not building enough homes. I also think we have to be honest that if we're importing millions upon millions of illegal aliens, we've got to put them somewhere, and that increased demand on housing is also driving the cost of American homes through the roof. So I really think we have to address both the supply and the demand side here, cut down on illegal immigration, build more homes, lower interest rates. That's how you solve the housing crisis in this country.
Housing is one market. From the cheapest apartment in the most dilapidated structure to the most expensive home, it's all one market. Put pressure on any segment, you influence other segments. Senator, what's the closing strategy for you? Where are you going in the next 2 weeks?
Pretty much everywhere. I'm headed to Texas for a fundraiser tonight and then to Arizona and Nevada early this week. I think we're going to be in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all those states in the next few days. So I think the president is doing a big rally in Greenville, North Carolina today. So we're really just hitting the big 7 battleground states. I think, you'll see me mostly in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan down the stretch. But look, man, we've got to win all these states, and I think that we will. We just got to make sure that people see us and drive home the message that we could have a much more prosperous, lower inflation, more affordable country. We just have to get back to the common sense policies of Donald Trump.
Senator, I want to close with the biggest missing ingredient of this election. Neither candidate has been asked about Xi Jinping and his intentions and the Chinese Communist Party and its ambitions. How do you assess, not the tariff policy, but generally, what do you think Xi wants? What do you think the CCP intends?
Well, it's very important, but also a very complicated question, Hugh. And the way that I think about it is it's, of course, impossible to know how much they want Taiwan. They certainly want it. We don't know how much they want it. And I think part of American policy over the next few years has to be to make it as costly as possible for them to seize it by force, right? This is why it's important to get the Taiwanese the defensive weapons systems they need, is because if we make it harder for Xi to take Taiwan, that's going to change his calculus as much as possible. When you war game this out, Hugh, we know that once the Chinese gain a foothold in Taiwan, it becomes extremely difficult to do anything from there. So what you really have to do is make this thing as costly as possible to establish that foothold. I think that has been the main thrust of American national security policy. Unfortunately, the implementation under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has been really lacking. So we've got to establish deterrence. We've got to get them the weapons that they need. We've got to make this as costly as possible. And I think if we do all those things, we can make sure that Taiwan remains independent.
Do you think Xi, though, I'll tell you what, I think he's a Leninist, a hardcore communist, and that he believes that, he really has it in his soul, and he's ruthless. Is that your understanding of the man?
I think he's certainly ruthless. I don't know that he is a Leninist as much as a sort of ultra-Chinese nationalist. In some ways, I think that, the Nazis in the 30s and 40s are sort of a better middle frame for Xi than maybe the Soviets of the 50s and 60s. But look, man, it's very complicated. It's a very old civilization with a lot of historical baggage. And I think that we just have to recognize that they see themselves, basically Western dominance of the last few centuries, they see as sort of a blip in the historical radar. They think Chinese civilization is meant to rule the world. And so I think that we have to recognize they have extremely ambitious plans, and we have to have our own ambitious plans to counter it.
My last question, Senator, because I know you have a hard out at 46. The defense budget will be on the table the moment you take office if you win. What will be your advice to President Trump about immediate lifts of that and things like expanding the Philadelphia shipyard? 30 seconds, Senator.
Very simple. We want to build more weapons. We have to build more ships. Part of that is spending, Hugh, but also part of it is procurement. I think we have to fix the procurement process in this country, make it much more efficient. That will be my advice.
Senator JD Vance, thank you for stopping by. Good luck. And boy, is he good on television and radio. He is an excellent choice. I was also reminded, relieffactor.com, because it's the dreaded overhead bin day today. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, omega. Every morning, in the first hour of the program, I take my Relief Factor because I am not into minor aches and pains. I don't like stiff shoulders and bad backs. I got 5.5 miles in yesterday. Not bad, not great, but the Beltway weather is very terrific. I hope it's nice in Columbus. I'm off to Columbus to do an event tonight with Mike Gallagher and Bernie Moreno. You can find the event details over at battlegroundtour.com. David Drucker is with the Dispatch. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good morning.
I have a couple of data points for you. Just breaking news from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution this morning. Donald Trump, this final poll that the AJC is going to run, Trump has 47% and Harris 43% among likely voters. And then from John Ralston's The Daily Indy out of Nevada, and you know John and I know John,
Yep.
The Republicans lead by about 8,000 votes statewide, or 3% in terms of the early voting and in-person voting there. John's very surprised that hasn't happened since 2004. And he suggests maybe the Reid machine is breaking down. Your reaction to those two data points, and my general assumption that data points are data points. We don't know the story, and we won't know the story until the night of November 5.
Yeah, look, the Nevada one's much more interesting, Hugh, but it shows us, something that we've known for some time, which is that Trump is more competitive in Nevada this time than he was in his previous two campaigns, as close as they were, and more competitive than Republicans have been since 2004 when George W. Bush won Nevada. It's the last time a Republican won Nevada. The Georgia polling's interesting, but it's from, where are we on the 20th? We're on the 22nd today. That poll was taken the 16th and 17th, so early last week to mid last week, and these things can move, especially in a close race. But Ralston is one of the few guys that knows how to analyze early vote, and in his state, and so that is something to pay attention to. And if you're Democrats, you've got to be concerned.
So I have written a Fox News column today, David, on the various Senate candidates. I'm flying to Ohio after the show today and doing an event with Bernie Moreno and Mike Gallagher tonight in Columbus. I think Bernie is now statistically tied with Sherrod Brown, which not many people thought would have it. Same with David McCormick and Bob Casey. What do these wisps of data in the wind tell you about the Senate control next year?
Well, we already know, at least we think we know, but it seems a pretty secure piece of analysis that Republicans are in a position to pick up the Senate. West Virginia is going to flip. That's just done. The polling in Montana and the behavior of both parties in that Senate race showed Tim Sheehy, the Republican nominee, ahead substantially. And Donald Trump's going to carry Montana, by double digits, maybe 12 points, maybe 16 points, somewhere in there. Just too much for John Tester to outrun. So there we are at 51-49. And then Republicans are pressing in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio. And I may be leaving something out, but
Maryland. I think maybe Maryland might be. You just can't count Larry Hogan out. He was so popular.
You don't have to. I'm skeptical because it's like the reverse of Montana, only worse, because Harris will win, by about, anywhere from 20 to 30 points. That being said, the point I was going to get to is Sherrod Brown seems to be, of the red staters, not the purple staters, seems to be the only incumbent Democrat with a shot at holding on in a state Trump will win by anywhere from 8 to 10 points. But Moreno's numbers have been improving and improving and improving. And look, I've thought all along, Democrats were trying to paint him, as an unacceptable right-wing Republican, and he just doesn't stylistically play that way. And so I always thought that he was going to put himself in a position to win. But if there was any, red state Democrat that might hold on, I think Brown is the only one that might. But the polling is showing Moreno in a good position. And look, when you're pressing your opponents in purple states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and particularly in Wisconsin, where Republicans themselves were in high on Eric Hovde, to say the least, and Tammy Baldwin has usually been in a better position by now. You've got to feel good about possibly picking up a larger majority than you had envisioned. And I left out races in Nevada and Arizona, but Republicans do not feel confident about those Senate races, even though they're very confident about President Trump's prospects in both states for all the obvious reasons.
Now, Democrats cannot seem to make up their mind where to spend their money on trying to flip a red seat. There's Ted Cruz in Texas, and they were excited about Allard for a while, and that's kind of died down now that Cruz has got a 7-point lead. They're excited about Rick Scott for a while, but then Trump's just so strong in Florida, and DeSantis has done another great job that's faded away. So now they're throwing everything into Nebraska, where Deb Fischer is a ranking member on armed services and widely popular, and they're trying to run a union guy as an independent. What do you make of that?
Look, Hugh, there's always some race that pops up that nobody expected that appears competitive. Look, I mean, if I had to bet money, I'd bet that Fischer will pull it out. It's a red state. You've got Trump at the top of the ticket. And so even if people are unhappy or just sort of, not excited about Fischer, in the same way they are about other Republicans, she ought to end up pulling it out. Osborne's an interesting character, an interesting candidate. He's made the race competitive. We know it's competitive because Republicans have put money in there. Fischer will probably finish ahead.
Back in the Beltway as is Byron York, who never leaves. I think Byron is glued permanently to the Beltway. Byron, good morning to you. How are you?
Funny you should say that. I am actually in Pennsylvania as we speak.
Oh, my goodness, reporting on the ground. I'm going to Columbus later today. Are you there to cover McCormick, Trump, or both?
I was here. I went to Trump's town hall in Lancaster on Sunday evening, and then Harris's sort of town hall in Malvern yesterday.
Now, Byron, yesterday I played one clip more than any other clip. It wasn't the McDonald's stuff. That's given birth to 1,000 memes. It's the face that launched 1,000 chips. I played Donald Trump getting chanted USA, USA at the Steelers game. There is no more diverse crowd of genuinely authentic Yinzers than the Steelers home game against the Jets, because tickets are cheap because it's the Jets. What did you make of that? I can't imagine any other politician walking into a Steelers game and getting that kind of reception.
Well, I think it means a lot of voters now equate supporting Trump with patriotism, and the way they react to seeing Trump is to chant "USA, USA." Now, we saw Democrats try to adopt this on some occasion, but they just haven't done it very much. They certainly wouldn't have done it at the event I went to yesterday, the Harris event. So I think it's just that Trump has become sort of so iconic in some voters' minds that they actually equate him with patriotism.
Now, before I go to Vice President Harris and her horrible, very bad, terrible 2 weeks, I want to bring to you a Washington Post story this morning. Now, I work for the Post, so and I like Leanne Caldwell, one of the writers. But the headline is Republicans lean into anti-transgender message in closing weeks. Subhead, GOP candidates are attacking transgender rights in swing states as part of a final pitch to voters. First paragraph, Donald Trump and other GOP candidates are increasingly targeting transgender people in the election closing days, invoking them as boogeymen at rallies and pouring millions into advertising, tying Democrats to transgender rights. Now, I know Leanne Caldwell from Post Live and her colleagues are colleagues of mine. I nevertheless think they missed the whole story, which is about girls and women's sports and their locker rooms. It's not about Republicans being mean to people with gender dysphoria. Am I nuts, or did they just cast this the way that Democrats want it casted?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's about two issues. I think it is about sports. I think it's also about the Orwellian gender-affirming care that has become a big industry, big money industry, and has the full support of the Biden administration. I think it's the idea of allowing gender-affirming care, by which I mean puberty blockers, hormone treatments, and surgery to minors under any condition. It's just a terrible, terrible idea, and I think the humane position is to oppose that kind of thing on troubled youth who haven't even reached the age of 18. So that story to me, that lead that you just read, just has things completely upside down.
Yeah, I do think I have not had on any of the women athletes who are upset about losing trophies. I just stay away from it because if a family is dealing with gender dysphoria, it's difficult enough that they don't need to hear about it on the radio, on the car radio every day. But it's in an election season, voters do get motivated by stuff, and they want the extremism to stop. And it is an extreme thing when 5 years ago it was unheard of, either the surgeries or the sports or the locker rooms, unheard of. And then all of a sudden it's mandated in some places. And I think...
also remember that in this case you have Kamala Harris as a candidate in 2019 signing a document affirming her support of transgender transition operations, taxpayer funding of those it's almost a parody, for illegal immigrants who are in prison. And as a matter of fact, when Trump mentioned that in the September 10th debate with Harris, his only debate with Harris, when Trump actually mentioned it, there were a number of people on the left who said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Trump is fantasizing. He's making this stuff up, only to discover that Harris actually did that.
Now, she really ran pretty far to the left of left in 2019, 2020, and the disappearing of all of that audio by mainstream media, legacy media, is itself an issue in this race. And that's what I wanted to get to with you, Byron. As you are out in Pennsylvania, people know you from Fox. What do they tell you about the media?
Oh, look, it is the most distrusted institution in American life, I think. I think there's just absolutely no doubt. And, we've seen kind of to match this up with a story we're talking about today, the New York Times seems to have gone nuts about the McDonald's story because Trump has raised it to their consciousness, and they must try to knock it down. And they've done all these stories about it, and they're now referring to burgerism in an attempt to equate the Trump's position that Harris never worked at McDonald's, to equate that with birtherism from the Obama years, in which Trump was a prominent birther. So the Trump supporters, of course, they either laugh at this stuff or they're mad at this stuff. But the one thing they don't do is trust a word that a mainstream media outlets say.
Now, on the birtherism, McDonaldism, I can remember, Byron, every single summer job I had from the time I was a junior in high school. I can take you to where they are. I know my colleagues' names. I can produce that. How easy would it be if Harris was planning a trap, she would have sprung it. She ain't got nothing. There's nothing there. I now don't believe her because it would be so easy to hammer Donald Trump. But now the window's closed on hammering Donald Trump. I want to come to the Nevada vote. I want to keep you through the break. But wouldn't she have produced it if she had it?
Yeah, the New York Times actually did devote its investigative resources to this, to try to find proof of her working at McDonald's. And it's not that working McDonald's is important. It's just that Harris has claimed this as part of her having had a middle-class childhood. And so they go through the Times goes through all the ways you might be able to prove this. And they found a woman who was a friend of Harris's at the time, who says that Ms. Harris's mother, I'm going to read this, Ms. Kagan, the friend, said that Ms. Harris's mother, who died in 2009, had told Ms. Kagan about the summer job years ago. That's it. That's all they got. And
because if you found a friend of my mom,
that Harris is telling the truth and Trump is lying.
Yeah, I'm 8 years older than Kamala Harris. But if you found one of my deceased mother's friends who told you that I had worked at the Red Barn, they would be confusing me with my brother who did work at the Red Barn. I was never dumb enough to work at the French fry stand. I was always a lifeguard because I was outside and easy. And that's not evidence of anything. It's such an absurd thing to be talking about. We should be talking about, and I want to get to now and start. We'll go to break, Byron. John Ralston, longtime friend of the show until the last cycle because he hated Adam so much that we just stopped talking. But Ralston's good on the early vote stuff. Have you been catching up on the Daily Indy, where Republicans, for the first time, I think, since 2004, are leading in the early vote in Nevada?
Yeah, this is really striking. We're seeing this change all around the country, but perhaps most striking there.
And so, what can we, if anything, draw from that?
Well, first of all, I think Democrats were going to vote by mail and early less than they did in 2020 because there's no COVID. I mean, I think that's just everybody, I think, knew that. But I think discouraging people from voting early and by mail in 2020 was perhaps the biggest tactical mistake that Donald Trump made. Because while he kept telling people that there would be this giant red wave on Election Day, the Democrats were banking millions of votes every single day in the run-up to the election. That was a terrible mistake on Trump's part.
I don't trust any online betting or any online model. Models are just constructs of whoever is making them. I could announce the Hewitt model, and I could say that it shows Donald Trump has an 80% chance of winning, and what would anyone know about the Hewitt model? There is no Hewitt model. I made it up. And ditto. I know Nate Silver's really got a model, but why should we believe it? As for the betting markets, it's not Vegas. There's not a line. The line doesn't move as the money comes in because professional betting houses are not in the business of making the correct bet. They're in the business of the VIG, right? So there is not that in betting markets on the president. So do you trust these things at all?
Well, this shows that these interviews are totally unrehearsed because I don't follow the betting markets at all. I generally believe exactly what you believe. And as troubled as the polls have been over the last couple of cycles, I don't find any relief in the betting market, so I just don't follow it.
And I want to explain to people why, and then see. I don't bet, but if I did bet, I would see an opening line, and if a line started to move, I would pay attention to it. And the people who do bet, especially on college and professional sports, the opening line begins to move because the people in Vegas are getting too much money on Team A versus Team B, so they're overexposed. They don't want to be exposed. They want the money to be equal on both sides, so they make whatever their VIG is. The vigorous is sometimes 5%, sometimes 7%. They want to make their percentage, so they move the line in order to attract more. There is no line on Trump and Harris, to my knowledge. I haven't investigated it. Have you, Byron?
No, I have not. But what we do know now from the polls, we know that the race has tightened quite a bit in the polls. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average of national polls, I think Harris is now leading by 0.9%. It had gotten up to about 2.4 percentage points at her best. And the reason this is important is that a lot of people believe that Harris has to have a lead of 2 to 3 percentage points to overcome the Republican Electoral College advantage. So she has to be 2 or 3 points ahead to win. Because Hillary Clinton was ahead by, I should remember this, by a certain number of points and lost, and then Biden was ahead by more points and won. So somewhere in there, Democrats have to have a lead in order to win.
All right, last question before we come back live, Byron. I have been following politics closely since 1976. I think Kamala Harris is the worst candidate of any major party candidate nominated for president in all those years. You're younger than I am. Do you agree with me?
I think that's a pretty arguable. That's a pretty reasonable point. Going to her went to her town hall with Liz Cheney in Malvern, Pennsylvania, and I have to say that the sheer emptiness of her events is really extraordinary. Don't last very long. I'm sure people have seen and heard about these predetermined questions that they had there. The town halls are not spontaneous exercises most of the time, neither side. But the vacuity of a Harris event is really kind of extraordinary. There is word salad, and then there's just very little to really kind of get your hands on in a Harris rally.
Byron, real tough question. When people say Kamala Harris is vacuous or vapid, what do they mean?
Well, the word generally means empty-headedness or emptiness or just a lack of thought. And, that is the feeling I had when we got to the end of the Malvern, Pennsylvania town hall with Liz Cheney. She later repeated the town halls. She did one in Michigan with Maria Shriver and Liz Cheney. And then the Cheney and Harris went to Wisconsin. I think it was with Charlie Sykes. So
she put Charlie Sykes on the stand?
Yeah, actually, it was interesting. The bulwark, the anti-Trump website and Democratic organization actually played a major role in this stuff. The publisher of the Bulwark was the moderator in Pennsylvania, and then Sykes, who is affiliated with them, was the moderator in Wisconsin. So 2 of the 3 were Bulwark related.
I just got to say that's astonishing to me. But let's put that aside. It doesn't mean anything to most of our listeners. You and I get what that means. People got to make a living. They just have to make a living. But vacuous, I think it means it's not stupid and it's not ignorant. It's a failure to have anything to say. And yeah. I don't know that you can win an election when people don't think you have anything to say.
Yeah, there's a lack of sometimes people would refer to it as granularity or sort of crunchiness or just something you can kind of bite down on that she offers. And she's very good at offering sympathy, and certainly on the campaign trail, there are people who describe, in speaking to a candidate, they'll describe just terribly difficult situations. There was a woman who had a second grade son, and her 72-year-old mother had dementia and required institutionalization. So this woman was absolutely squeezed between trying to take care of her son and her mother. And Harris, so she asked Harris, can you help? And Harris was very good at just expressing sympathy at great length. And then you thought, well, yeah, but what's the answer to the question? And finally she said, well, I'm going to have Medicare pay for your for home health care, which would be an insanely expensive proposition on a national scale, which she only rolled it out recently when she appeared on The View. And so, finally she got to something, but for just sort of minutes, there was this sort of, vacuous word verbiage, and you never got any idea of what's going on.
Now we have a tracking poll from TIP that shows Trump gaining on an almost daily basis since the sit-down between Brett Baier and Kamala Harris. I'm talking to Brett next hour about it. I haven't talked to him since. I haven't talked to you since. What did you make of that exchange?
Oh, well, I thought it was extremely useful. I think that I was particularly impressed with the whole border stuff, where it just became clear, not that she wasn't going to answer a question, which she wasn't, but that she literally had no answer to the questions. And I thought, actually, the first question that Brett asked was, I thought, pretty brilliant, which was...
Oh, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
What's your estimate of the number of people who crossed illegally into the United States and have been allowed to stay by the Biden-Harris administration? So, just an actual concrete number. And there is a number. The House Judiciary Committee, I think, estimated it at 5.7 million, with another 1.9 million gotaways. So over 7 million people. And it was a concrete question, and she wouldn't go there. Because to go there would have been to admit that there's a premise to all this, that there's a real problem here that has to be addressed. And so from that moment on, she wouldn't answer anything.
The contrast with my conversation with JD Vance yesterday about immigration is so extraordinary with me. And yeah. I think it boils down to simply an unwillingness to prepare. Anyone who goes to law school can pass a bar exam if they'll put their butt in a chair and put the hours in. And she flunked the first bar exam. Doesn't mean you can't be a good lawyer. It just means you didn't do the work. One more response to a theory I've been working on, which is she's obviously not dumb, Vice President Harris, but she's obviously a terrible candidate. And so the only answer I can come up with is that she was prepared to be a vice presidential candidate, which means you support the presidential candidate no matter what he or she says in any setting on any day. And you don't do any independent study because you don't have independent study. You are actually managed by the president's campaign team. You're told where to go, you're given notes to say, and nobody really cares what you say. Then suddenly Biden is forced out because he's collapsing in front of our face, and she has to be the nominee. She grabs the brass ring because she's the closest on the merry-go-round. What do you think, Byron? It's just she was wholly unprepared, and you can't get ready in that period of time.
I don't think it was as shocking to her as the Biden departure was as shocking to her as you say. We do have reporting
interesting.
that she had done a lot of preparation for this in terms of making sure she got to know state party chairman, important county party chairman, big interest group types, all the people you need to know if you're trying to put together a run for president. And, if she could do that on a just-in-case basis, of course I plan to support President Biden in his run for re-election. But she also wants to meet all the chairmen of all the swing states. But she was actually preparing for that. But it's one thing to prepare in sort of logistics way, and it's another thing to actually prepare in a substance way. And what we've seen over and over and over with candidates is running for president kind of brutally exposes what you know and what you don't know. And you can't, it's like Supreme Court confirmation hearings. You can't cram for them. You either know this stuff from a lifetime in thinking about the law and Constitution, or you don't know this stuff. We saw a terrible example of that, with Harriet Miers, who had to be withdrawn from George W. Bush. And another person we saw it with in the presidential scheme was Scott Walker, who had done a fantastic job as governor of Wisconsin, was the hero of the Republican Party, and justifiably so. But he hadn't really thought about many of the issues that you have to think about when you're going to run for president. And so you can't just learn that. So I'm going to announce my candidacy next week, and I'll kind of cram before then.
Okay, fit the last question into that paradigm, Byron. She is interrupted by a Hamas sympathizer, Palestinian activist, who shouts, "Genocide, genocide, 18,000 children are dead." And then he's escorted from the room. She's used her standard, "I'm talking now, it's not your turn to talk." And then she goes on to say, he's got a point. I can't remember what her exact words were, but she expressed agreement with his point that there was a genocide underway in Gaza, which is a falsehood. It's a lie. That's not a lack of preparation. That's a reveal of inclination. Agree or disagree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's her view. And there are lots of people in academia, some in government, lots of people in Democratic elite circles who believe that. So that's an expression of an actual opinion of hers.
And I think it's going to hurt her considerably among supporters of the state of Israel, both Jewish Americans and non-Jewish Americans like me, who are sort of neo-Zionists because we're not originalists when it comes to that, but we certainly support the state of Israel's founding and its protection. I mean, do you know any people who don't believe in that, Byron?
Personally, no, I don't think so. But I mean, clearly they exist. Okay, they exist. They're a fairly prominent part of our media universe. And listen, I think it's entirely possible to have problems with the way Israel has conducted the war and still basically support it, and also believe that it's a sovereign nation and it's going to do what it's going to do. And Joe Biden shouldn't be trying to tell Israel what to do every day.
And he's been wrong for 50 years. The first law of Gates, Joe Biden is always wrong on national security, and he's never been more right than in the last year regarding Israel. Byron York, thank you. Follow him on X at Byron York. I'll play this when I come back. Thank you, Byron.
Thank you, Hugh.
One more response to a theory I've been working on, which is she's obviously not dumb, Vice President Harris, but she's obviously a terrible candidate. And so the only answer I can come up with is that she was prepared to be a vice presidential candidate, which means you support the presidential candidate no matter what he or she says in any setting on any day. And you don't do any independent study because you don't have independent study. You are actually managed by the president's campaign team. You're told where to go, you're given notes to say, and nobody really cares what you say. Then suddenly Biden is forced out because he's collapsing in front of our face, and she has to be the nominee. She grabs the brass ring because she's the closest on the merry-go-round. What do you think, Byron? It's just she was wholly unprepared, and you can't get ready in that period of time.
I don't think it was as shocking to her as the Biden departure was as shocking to her as you say. We do have reporting that she had done a lot of preparation for this in terms of making sure she got to know state party chairman, important county party chairman, big interest group types, all the people you need to know if you're trying to put together a run for president. And, she could do that on a just-in-case basis. Of course, I plan to support President Biden in his run for re-election. But she also wants to meet all the chairmen of all the swing states. But she was actually preparing for that. But it's one thing to prepare in sort of logistics way, and it's another thing to actually prepare in a substance way. And what we've seen over and over and over president kind of brutally exposes what you know and what you don't know. And you can't, it's like Supreme Court confirmation hearings. You can't cram for them. You either know this stuff from a lifetime in thinking about the law and Constitution, or you don't know this stuff. We saw a terrible example of that, with Harriet Miers, who had to be withdrawn from George W. Bush. And another person we saw it with in the presidential scheme was Scott Walker, who had done a fantastic job as governor of Wisconsin, was the hero of the Republican Party, and justifiably so. But he hadn't really thought about many of the issues that you have to think about when you're going to run for president. And so you can't just learn that. So I'm going to announce my candidacy next week, and I'll kind of cram before then.
Okay, fit the last question into that paradigm, Byron. She is interrupted by a Hamas sympathizer, Palestinian activist who shouts, genocide, genocide, 18,000 children are dead. And then he's escorted from the room. She's used her standard, I'm talking now, it's not your turn to talk. And then she goes on to say, he's got a point. I can't remember what her exact words were, but she expressed agreement with his point that there was a genocide underway in Gaza, which is a falsehood. It's a lie. That's not a lack of preparation. That's a reveal of inclination. Agree or disagree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's her view. And there are lots of people in academia, some in government, lots of people in Democratic elite circles who believe that. So that's an expression of an actual opinion of hers.
And I think it's going to hurt her considerably among supporters of the State of Israel, both Jewish Americans and non-Jewish Americans like me, who are sort of neo-Zionists because we're not originalists when it comes to that, but we certainly support the State of Israel's founding and its protection. I mean, do you know any people who don't believe in that, Byron?
Personally, no, I don't think so. But I mean, clearly they exist. Okay, they exist. They're a fairly prominent part of our media universe. And listen, I also think it's entirely possible to have problems with the way Israel has conducted the war and still basically support it, and also believe that it's a sovereign nation and it's going to do what it's going to do. And Joe Biden shouldn't be trying to tell Israel what to do every day.
And he's been wrong for 50 years. The first law of Gates, Joe Biden is always wrong on national security, and he's never been more right than in the last year regarding Israel. Byron York, thank you. Follow him on X at Byron York. I'll play this when I come back. Thank you, Byron. And I just did. Now I'm joined by Generalissimo, who, of course, is the MyPhDWeightLoss.com spokesperson of the year, because I think he's their only spokesperson. 864-644-1900. That's
864-644-1900.
Actually, Gallagher might be. I'm going to see Gallagher tonight and see whether or not Mike has put pounds back on since he did the My PhD weight loss. Is he still endorsing them and staying on the program like you are?
I don't know if he is or not. I haven't talked to Mike in quite some time. But I think he's
Are you mad at him? I'll tell him if you're mad at him.
I'm not any more mad at him than I always am.
All right. Okay, that's fair enough. But you are still on the program. You lost 50 pounds. You've kept it off. It's been 2.5 years?
Well, it's in August, 2.25.
2.25. 864-644-1900, or go to myphdweightloss.com. And would you just remind people what they do that's different from and especially different from poking yourself with an Ozempic pin for $1,000 a month for the rest of your life?
It's all about accountability. They assign you to a nutritionist that interviews you, talks to you, figures out what your likes are, what your dislikes are, your food taste, what your schedule is like, and creates a program that will give you the best chance of success. And then they talk to you every week. They talk to you constantly to be able to say, okay, what's working,
I don't want to
what's
blame
not
Rachel for your clothing selection.
I'm wearing the uniform. What the heck's your problem?
No, you had a purple shirt in there. It's not a purple shirt today, but you're wearing the uniform today, and that's fine. That's actually kind of required in the Hewitt Studio West. But now let's talk about Hewitt Studio East. Dwayne
Yep.
World is a great podcast that everyone should listen to. However, it has diverted Dwayne's attention from making my printer work.
If I had somebody there in the Beltway that had even Kamala Harris level of intelligence, you might have that printer working. Sadly, I don't have that.
I tried.
I know. God bless you. You tried.
I don't know if HP stands for Hewitt paralysis or not, but I may be stunned every time I touch it.
You and tech are like Kamala Harris and everything else.
And spontaneity.
Yes.
Yes, I am to technology as Kamala Harris
It's
is
the
to
town halls.
spontaneously eloquent.
Yes.
It's not happening. So when does Dwayne's World lay down?
We will tape that this afternoon, and it'll be based off whatever the news cycle is later today, and it'll drop first thing in the morning.
Now, I got to ask you one news-related question.
Sure.
The Israelis are telling people in the southern suburbs of Beirut,
Yep.
maybe you want to leave.
Uh-huh.
If you got that note from the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, would you leave?
I'd be Jesse Owens. I'd be gone. I'd be out of there.
It is not punishing the innocent. It is
No.
warning the innocent that the evil have brought down hell upon them.
It's telling me that I probably have a bunch of terrorists all around me. Maybe this is not the best place for me. But that's just me.
It's a big country. I hope a lot. There's one suburb, which is like Hezbollah Central, and they're going to level it before long because they tried to kill Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu. When you go after the wife, it's like sending a drone at Mar-a-Lago. Now, my last question for you, and I would put this to you as a question for Dwayne's World. I would like to hear your answer on this.
Okay.
If someone attacked Mar-a-Lago, what would Joe Biden and Kamala Harris do?
Applaud.
That's unfortunately.
I mean,
they might
a
golf clap at least.
They wouldn't do a thing. They would do the phony outrage of, well, we can't resort to violence in this country, but there would be no price to pay. There would be no penalty. There would be no Justice Department investigation. It would just languish. It
All right,
wouldn't
now I
happen.
want to go while I have time to Elon Musk at a Pennsylvania rally on Saturday because it's the best 3 minutes on government regulation in the world.
It was
Cut
stand
number
up.
one.
Yeah.
Cut number one.
I mean, I got a bunch of sort of nutty stories, you know. Some of them are, I guess, kind of funny. There's, you know, we had to do this. SpaceX had to do the study to see if Starship would hit a shark, and I'm like, it's a big ocean, you know. There's a lot of sharks. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. And said, well, you have to, you know, this is, I think, from National Marine Fisheries, one of the, you know, NIMF it's called. You know, they were like, well, you have to do the study on whether you can hit a shark. We're like, what? And then we said, okay, fine, we'll do the analysis. And then, well, can you give us the shark data? They're like, no, we can't give you the shark data. We're like, okay, well, then we're in a bit of a quandary. How do we solve this this shark probability issue? And they said, well, we could give it to our Western division, but we don't trust them. And I'm like, am I in a comedy sketch here? And then, like they're worried about the shark density data, like the people who hunt sharks for shark fins somehow getting their hands on this shark data. And so eventually, I think we got the data, and we could run the analysis to say, like, yeah, the sharks are going to be fine. But they wouldn't let us proceed with launch until we did this crazy shark data. And then we thought, okay, now we're done. And they said, but what about whales? I'm like, when you look at a picture of the Pacific, what percentage of the surface area of the Pacific do you see as whale? Because look at a picture, I don't see any. It's like, where's a whale? And honestly, if the ship did hit a whale, it's like, honestly, that whale had it coming, because it's like the odds are.
It just is so great. It keeps going. Find it online. I got to tell you, Abe Greenwald is really one of the smartest people in commentary's universe, and that means the universe of universes. And Abe just posted we're now here. And he quote tweets the Hill's op-ed, "What if Joe Biden was the better candidate all along?" And, you know, there are not a few Democrats who are thinking that right now as Kamala collapses. Donald Trump goes from strength to strength, from McDonald's fryer to North Carolina disaster to the Steelers Stadium to the Georgia suburbs. He's everywhere and he's surging in every poll. And we have Democrats wondering out loud at the Hill, what if Joe Biden was the better candidate? And when Abe Greenwald says we're here now, what he's saying is the race is fundamentally reverted to the collapse that we saw on the night of the first presidential debate when Donald Trump simply won the election. We said, I don't know what he said. I don't think he knows what he said. And that was the end of Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is a 2-hour-a-day president. And right after he wakes up, he's great. And then downhill for the rest of the day, and the decline is accelerating, and it's simply going to stay that way. It's not going to change. So Abe Greenwald, my hat tip to you, one of the commentary podcast people whom I listen to every day that they get out there. It's Abe Greenwald and John Bodhoritz and Seth Mandel and Matt Continetti and Christine Rosen. Great podcast. Another great podcast, the most important one, is Ruthless, with Josh Holmes and Michael Duncan and John Ashbrook, and Comfortably Smug, who I think will be joining me on Thursday as I hit for the cycle on the Comfortably Smug podcast. I've had Abe on, I've had Christine on. I've not yet had Seth on because I have his spouse, Bethany Mandel, on every week. But I'm going to have to hit for the Cycle Plus one, as they have 5 regular contributors. And I want to explain to you, why am I telling you so much about podcasts? We've got a lot of great podcasts at Salem Podcast Network. A lot of great ones. And I still believe in the power of talk radio. That's why I'm doing this every day, 3 hours a day, and I'll be doing it at least for 4 more years. Probably retire at that point, but who knows? Depends on where the country is. If Donald Trump wins, cuts the regulatory state in half, keeps the taxes low, rebuilds the American military, and has such momentum behind it that it can't be reversed, and America has prospered again, then it's going to be time to get out of the way. In the meantime, we have to do something about the collapse of credibility of mainstream media. And the only way to do something about the collapse of credibility of mainstream media is to promote alternatives. One of the alternatives is talk radio. That's why I've got almost 500 affiliates. It's why I want to get up early every day and talk you through the news. It's why I tell you what you need to know about elections, and I urge you to get out and vote early. Go vote early. Stuff happens. It could be a 1-vote election in some states. It could be a 1-vote election in North Carolina. I was so happy to hear from my son's mother-in-law that she had stood in line for a long time in North Carolina in order to get her vote cast. And very interesting conversations in that line. Not my experience yesterday after the program. I went over to the early voting slot in Northern Virginia, in and out in 10 minutes. And I posted on my X account at Hugh Hewitt, which I encourage you to go to. Go to the X account at Hugh Hewitt. I use it for news. I have no more sports to talk about because the Cleveland Browns are just a disaster. And the Guardians had a great year, but now I have to wait until February to start following spring ball again and find out how they're going to have a rotation when they don't have a rotation. However, the Cavaliers are going to be good, but the NBA doesn't really matter until April. And so I'm just in a sports vacuum. Ohio State's good, but that won't really matter until we get to the 12 playoffs. Of course, we got to beat that team up north after Thanksgiving. But other than that, it's an empty desert of sports for me. So I am just filling it up with podcasts. And I happen to be very interested in the war that Israel finds itself in with Iran. It has 7 fronts. It's all with Iran, right? I'm not saying the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon, the war with Yemen. It's the war with Iran. And they're getting ready to hammer Iran in a way that we don't know and will not know, and we don't know the timing of. I hope it brings down the Iranian regime, because the Iranian people are pro-West. The Iranian people are an ancient and great people. The Iranian country under the Shah was our strongest ally in the region, and they can be that again. History does not have an inevitability about it. America is not guaranteed. Neither is Khamenei and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Regime change happens all the time. Neither is Xi Jinping. There comes a point in which people realize we can't live this way. It happened in Ukraine with the Orange Revolution. It happened in a number of states. Happened in Georgia. Happened all over the world. during the Arab Spring. It happens sometimes when people have just had enough. The good news about America is that people get to vote. We have it ingrained in our system. When we get angry, we just toss the bums out and we bring in new people. And sometimes we bring back the old people that we threw out, in this case, Donald Trump, because turns out he was a better president than Joe Biden by a lot, and that the border matters. And I'm a border hawk and a regularization dove. And I think Donald Trump is the same. When I talk to the president the next time, I'll ask him about that, because I think he wants a very strong border so he can be very lenient with good people who have come here, because he wants to keep America good, but he also wants it to be safe. And between now and the election, the only surprise that can happen are really bad ones. Pray that they don't happen. I want to welcome Brett Baier, host of Special Report. Good morning, Brett. Congratulations on a great interview with the vice president last week. I want to talk about that. But first, congratulations. The first question, how long did it take you to come up with the perfect opening question?
I only had 2 days to get ready when we found out about the interview. So I started to murder board it out, and listening to the vice president's answers on immigration, I was trying to cut through what were clearly, long talking points that ended up in a bipartisan bill. So I knew pretty much how she was going to answer, and I was just trying to get to the point of the original question.
It's such a neutral question, and it set the tone because you were going to ask fair questions. I am curious, if she had arrived on time, would it have been a significantly different interview in your view?
I think it might have, Hugh. I mean, I think I look back and what did I feel crunched? I probably did. I really wanted to get to a couple of more things about the economy. I really wanted to do a dismount and say, I have this thing called Common Ground where I have Democrats and Republicans on the show. If you win or if you lose, half of the people in America will have voted for the other guy who you say is a threat to democracy and unhinged and dangerous. In that realm, how do you bring the country together? I wanted to dismount with that, but I just didn't have time.
Well, I have been in the situation where by technical difficulties, people have stiffed me, and it happens in broadcast, and you just roll along. You don't get upset. But when it's such an important interview, what was the excuse that they gave you for being late? I think they were late by 15 minutes. Am I right about that?
It was about 17. So we had to start the taping at 5:18 to be able to turn the tape around for the top of the 6 o'clock, just technically. And we told them that. They didn't really give an excuse. They said she was in a holding room in the building. The event she was in had already finished, and she was in a conference room. And the vice president walked out at 5:17, and we sat at 5:17:30, and all my producers were sweating. And so anyway, we got it on. I was happy for the time that they gave us, and but it was tense there at the end to see if we could turn the tape around.
Well, now I want to talk about the technical side of this because I want the audience to understand. When you say turn around, what do you have to do with the tape that you have produced in Pennsylvania in order to air it on Special Report, which airs at 6 p.m. East Coast time?
It's just a physical matter of dumping it from one computer to another, and it just takes time to populate an interview that long. And so we had committed to just doing it as live, and in other words, live to tape, and turn it around. But to have the computer that in the control room that actually plays the interview, have it finished, digesting it all, and you know how you have the circle wheel that is going and going, it just takes time. So we calculated that in order to do that turnaround with a roughly 25 to 30-minute interview, we would need to start by 5:18.
Now, this is a hypothetical question, but I think she would have been better served if she had said, I want to do an hour. I'm going to sit down with you at 4. Let's do some breaks. Let's make it work for the Fox audience, and you can count me down, and we're going to be professional about this, the way that your Common Ground segments run, the way that major interviews often run, unless they're going to be edited, like 60 minutes. Do you agree with my assessment that she would have better served her campaign had she not jammed you?
I think so. It's all hypothetical now. I mean, I think just spacing it out would have created more conversations, and I also think, there is that filibuster. Every politician has it, and you would be able to let that go a little bit to be able to come back to conversations that you wanted to. So, yeah, I mean, listen, I rerun it in my head, but I think it is what it is, Hugh, and in the end, that their campaign got, I think, what they wanted, which was her to be fiery about Donald Trump and have a moment pushing back about his threat to democracy, and she did that numerous times. I think she mentioned his name 15 or 20 times in the interview.
Yeah, they may have wanted that, but I'm of the opinion, I know you won't comment on this, Brett, that she is poorly served by the campaign team that she has. I don't think they're very good at how they're doing this at all, that the emptiness of the campaign is now weighing her down. In fact, I'm looking at the Hill this morning. What if Joe Biden was the better candidate all along? It's a Harry Ullman opinion piece. But over on commentary, Abe Greenwald is really one of the smartest people in the business. Over at Commentary Magazine says, this is where we are now. And what he means by that is that Democrats are beginning to wonder, ought we to have stuck with Joe Biden, and who in the world had advised Joe Biden to challenge Donald Trump to 2 debates, because that sunk Biden, and he could have run a basement campaign. He could have run I'm in the middle of a war campaign, and maybe they'd be doing better. I'm not sure, but what if they had gone dark, Brett? We're doing counterfactuals with history now, but what if they had just simply said, no debates, no press conference, I'm not meeting with Trump, he's a threat to democracy, and hid Joe Biden away?
I think they would have gotten some grief, but they would have been the candidate, and would have run ads and surrogates, and I think they would have gotten grief, though, not being able to be public. And obviously, the choice to do that debate super early, on both sides was interesting, because by doing it, the Trump campaign, took out their probably easier opponent, although now there's a lot of, looking back and saying, could Scranton Joe have pulled some Pennsylvania counties better than Vice President Harris? We'll see. I mean, it seems like there's a couple good weeks here, Hugh, for the former president. But the Democrats traditionally have a really good get-out-the-vote effort, and that's what I think is their ace in the hole.
I'm sure you've been following John Ralston, because everyone in our business does. And when John says that Republicans are winning the early vote in Nevada, and it's palpable, his shock, and it's been confirmed by Decision Desk HQ. They're ahead by 3,000. There is no Clark County firewall in the early vote. He's kind of stunned by that, Brett, and it's just another straw in the wind, and there are lots of straws in the wind. Do you put any particular importance on that?
I do. I put it importance because Ralston has seen the numbers time and time again, and for him to be shocked, that's significant. I mean, could the early, pitch of no tax on tips had, changed some dynamics there? Could, and if it is that, and if Trump goes on to win Nevada, I think, the coattails are large there, and Brown does a lot better and possibly, pulls out that seat. I think you can tell that story in a number of different Senate races that changed the Senate map as well.
Yeah. Last question. I've got a column over at Fox News this morning on the Republican Senate map looking better and better. Last question. In the McDonald's Lollapalooza, I mean, it was an amazing gimmick, stunt, call it what you will, campaign event. Amazing in terms of earned media. Lost in that, though, is a clip of the former president at a Steelers-Jets game that night, where the chant USA, which I've always associated with the 1980 hockey win by USA, it broke out. I think the Steelers crowd's a pretty diverse crowd in Pittsburgh, Brett. Do you think that was significant?
I do, and it didn't really play a lot of places, but as you look at it, it is pretty significant, and the crowd is rising up. I think he's done some really interesting retail politics things, doing the barbershop, talking to those guys as they're getting their haircut. I listen, that stuff on TV is one thing, but when the campaign then clips it out and micro targets it to, who they're trying to get to specifically, I think it becomes very valuable. And there have been a number of those incidents. So I think it's better. Britt Hume said it last night. It's much better physically, emotionally, than closing with Liz Cheney on the other side.
Amen to that. And Britt is very, very rarely wrong. Joined by Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. Senator Cotton, I like to give back to my regular guests like you, so I want you to know, do you happen to know who John August Arvedson is?
You've stumped me on that one, Hugh.
Well, he discovered lithium. And do you know the periodic table symbol for lithium? Because you'd better know in a hurry.
I think it's Li, isn't it?
It is Li.
We got a lot of it down in
from
South
News
Arkansas.
Items' first story this morning. Researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey and the Arkansas government announced on Monday that they had found a trove of lithium, a critical raw material for electric vehicle batteries, in an underground brine reservoir in Arkansas. With the help of water testing and machine learning, the researchers determined there might be 5 million to 19 million tons of lithium, more than enough to meet all of the world's demand for the metal, in a geological formation known as, and I love this, the Smackover Formation. So, Senator Cotton, when did you learn about the Smackover Formation?
Well, Hugh, Smackover is a great little town in South Arkansas, and we've been producing oil and gas in South Arkansas going back more than a century. Not on large numbers, certainly nothing like what you see in the Permian Basin today or the Bakken Formation up in North Dakota, but pretty steadily. I would quibble a little bit with that New York Times story, which I read earlier today. It's not as if it was suddenly discovered out of the blue. The smart geologists and drillers and other folks down there in the oil patch have always said, look, we've known that we've got these resources down there. We've always known that. It's just a matter of the technology to produce it. I think that's the story of hydraulic fracturing over the last 20 years in America, and soon to be the production of lithium in South Arkansas and perhaps a few other places in America, of American ingenuity and inventiveness and entrepreneurial spirit. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris and the Democrats would kill off if they win this election. I mean, she said,
yeah, that's the thing the story doesn't tell you. You're going to need a lot of permits to go get the lithium.
Yeah, tons of This is an active issue in South Arkansas about how they're going to produce it, which technology is going to be best, what the royalty rates are going to be. But the one thing everyone in South Arkansas agrees is this would be great for our economy. Whatever you think about electric vehicles, and most folks in Arkansas aren't the biggest fans of them, lithium is needed for every modern device, for your smartphone, for your tablet, for your computer, for your refrigerator, and everything else in your life. So this is a huge economic opportunity for South Arkansas. But the Democrats will, as they usually do, find yet another reason not to pursue this opportunity. It's just like you see in the energy world. They wanted to replace coal with natural gas, but then natural gas became viable, and that's fossil fuel, so we can't do that. So let's use windmills instead. Well, windmills, take up too much air, space in the skyline off Martha's Vineyard, and so on and so forth. With Donald Trump and Republicans, everyone from South Arkansas to Martha's Vineyard and in between will have a fair shake to get ahead and lead a high quality of life. With the Democrats in office, they will not. They will continue.
I also want to point out the Chi-Coms had this market. Didn't the Chinese have this market cornered and into a way that it was a bottleneck?
In the processing and manufacturing, yes. It's important to note that lithium, like most so-called rare earth elements, are not really all that rare. It's not like, say, oil, which is concentrated in certain places in the world, and there's lots of countries that are not especially friendly to the United States that have a lot of oil. Rare earth elements are fairly common in terms of the mining, whether in the United States or in friendly nations. What's not common, and this is a pure failure of policy, is the manufacturing and processing of it. So in addition to finding the right technology to produce all the lithium in South Arkansas, we as a country need to make a major investment in manufacturing and processing lithium and other rare earth elements. It makes absolutely no sense to produce lithium in South Arkansas and then ship it to China so they can turn it into a finished product. We need to do that here in the United States. That's good for our national security. It also provides thousands and thousands of high-paying jobs.
Now, Senator, this brings me in a roundabout way to one of the main reasons people should vote for Trump. I've already voted. I'm done. Hopefully I won't get more pitches from people to give them money because I voted for Hung Kao yesterday, of course, for Donald Trump and JD Vance. And I posted it, and I hope everyone goes out and does early voting. But I'm looking forward to the renewal of the regulatory reform efforts of the Trump era, where for every new regulation promulgated, 2 had to be stripped off. They actually exceeded that. We need to cut the federal government in half, in my view. Do you think the first reconciliation, if we win the Senate, we being the GOP, hold the House and elect Donald Trump, that the first reconciliation will empower him to strike at the regulatory state, both directly and indirectly?
I think there's no question, Hugh, that it will. Just to give you one example, in the Democrats' big budget bill, they hired tens of thousands of new IRS agents to harass small businesses and working families. That's just one example of how those bills can empower the regulatory state and how our bill could empower individuals and businesses and entrepreneurs. But you're right more broadly that when we had Donald Trump in office, we didn't just have lower taxes for families and businesses. We had a government that was focused on unleashing the American free enterprise system as opposed to creating a wet blanket of regulations to lay across it. And that's exactly what the Democrats have done for the last 4 years.
Now, Senator, yesterday I had your colleague, Senator Vance, on, who I think is going to be our next vice president. We talked at the end of the conversation about the China threat and whether or not Xi was a Leninist or a fascist. And JD thinks he's a fascist. I think he's a Leninist. In the end, we both agree he's an enemy. JD talked about reforming acquisition at the Pentagon. Is that even possible?
Oh, sure, Hugh, it's possible. And there are some fairly clear ways to go about it. Take the problem we have with our munitions right now, the so-called empty bins or empty magazine problem, that any kind of major conflict with Taiwan, we might run out of munitions in just a week or two. These are technologically advanced weapons. It's not a bazooka for World War II, but they're also not a stealth bomber. It's not an aircraft carrier. With the right kind of leadership and initiative there to focus on it and drill down on the problem, with some new legal authorities from Congress, like buying more multi-year contracts or getting more foreign countries to buy our munitions, making it easier for them, therefore creating more demand, we can substantially increase production rate. Likewise, there's lots of great companies out there that have broken into the defense space, in part because they have iconoclastic billionaires who are willing to break China at the Pentagon. You think about Palmer Luckey and Anduril or Elon Musk and SpaceX. It shouldn't take an iconoclastic billionaire if you have a good idea, especially if you have commercially available off-the-shelf technology, to get into the Pentagon and sell your technology that's going to keep our soldiers safe and help them fight and win our country's wars, and therefore deter them in the first place. It will take some strong directed leadership, though, in the same way that Bob Gates came in the middle of war and was focused on things like getting mine-resistant vehicles to the field or cutting down medevac times. It really will take leadership there that makes that a very high priority.
Now, Senator, I know you've been on the road for your colleagues who are running for the Senate, either for re-election like Deb Fischer and Ted Cruz and Rick Scott, who are the 3 long shot targets that Democrats have put circles around. But also, I'm going to be in Ohio tonight with Bernie Moreno and then up in Philadelphia on behalf of Dave McCormick on Thursday night. I am curious, how do you feel about the Senate right now? We'll come to the Trump race at the end, but what about the Senate?
Hugh, I feel very good. I was down with Rick Scott yesterday. I've been in both those states you mentioned. Getting ready to go on a final blitz here, basically around all of our states. Hugh, you can look at the polls, but sometimes it's just better to look at people's actions. When I was up in Pennsylvania, I saw Bob Casey running an ad talking about how he was working with Donald Trump on trade. He was right there. He was Donald Trump's wingman. When I was in Wisconsin, I saw an ad of Tammy Baldwin. She got Trump to sign her bill. Her bill working with Donald Trump to protect American manufacturing jobs. You know, Hugh, I haven't yet seen a Republican ad talking about how we worked with Kamala Harris on this, that, or the other thing. So that tells you
Nor
about
will
all
you.
you need to know about these races. Or for that matter, Hugh, I noticed that Chuck Schumer's super PAC just dumped a bunch of money into the New Mexico Senate race. Well, they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think it was close.
Oh, what now? Give me a little hope for Hung Kao, because if we elected senators the old way, the legislatures did it, and we did it on merit and a little bit of diversity, there really is no more unusual Senate candidate who on merit would be in the United States Senate than Hung Kao. Prayer there, hopeful there, what is that?
Well, I think every Virginian Republican should certainly get out and vote early for Donald Trump and Hung Kao like you did. Hung is a great American. He's an immigrant here. He went on to work in the Navy. He worked with Special Operations Forces. He'd be a very strong voice for the people of Virginia. And like I said, I would encourage everyone to get out and vote early. For that matter, in every state, get out and vote early. I know, like you obviously, you're going to miss a vote, but when people like you get out and vote early, it allows these campaigns to cross your name off their list, and then they can move down to those voters who maybe don't get out and vote in every single election. So Hung's a great candidate in Virginia, and let's remember Glenn Youngkin got elected in Virginia just 3 years ago. So it is not a deep blue state. It's a state that can be won, especially if we have a big Republican turnout.
And Ed Gillespie almost beat Mark Warner. I mean, it was the missed opportunity. Let me close with this. You talk to the former president frequently. He's a master closer. He knows how to close, and he's closing in Pennsylvania at McDonald's in the Steelers game. What do you think right now, Senator Cotton?
Well, I think Trump's going to win. I think all the omens are pointing in this direction. I mean, he's even got Hugh Hewitt speaking favorably of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But
True.
I just think more and more people remember that times were good with Donald Trump. I understand that some voters, mostly Democrats, they don't like his style, the way he talks. That's fine. But most Americans like low prices and high wages and a secure border and a peaceful world. And they look at what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have delivered, which is the exact opposite of that. And also, they have a lot of questions about Kamala Harris, the big switcheroo 3 months ago. And she hasn't done anything to allay those concerns. In fact, I think she's heightened those concerns, and you see it almost every single day.
A quick last question, Senator, because you're on Senate Intel. We've had this leak of the Israeli Air Force plans. It's treasonous. Have you been briefed on it yet at Senate Intel?
I haven't been briefed, Hugh. No, we've been out of session. I haven't been in the secure information space. I don't want to confirm or deny the authenticity of those documents, but I can say this. We've had a year of leaks hostile to Israel, and you shouldn't be surprised that you have those anti-Israel leaks from this administration, because they've staffed their administration from top to bottom with a bunch of Students for Justice in Palestine radicals, from Kamala Harris's national security advisor down to the briefcase carriers and the coffee makers. Those are the kind of anti-Israel radicals in this administration, and in 2 months, they'll all be gone.
That is why. I mean, if you're a friend of Israel, if you're an American Jew, or even a person like me who's not Jewish but a strong supporter of Israel, go out and vote for Donald Trump, because we've got to get this administration cleaned out of the pro-Iranian appeasement crowd. Ambassador Robert O'Brien was the last national security advisor for President Trump. He's on most of the gossip sheet list for some sort of a job in the Trump administration, but I asked him on today because when he talks to the Trump people, I want to be the ambassador to the European Union for like a 6-month period so I can go over there and scream at them. They're trying to kill our domestic companies, Mr. Ambassador. Am I right about that?
Hugh, as always, you're right. Great to be with you this morning.
So they're after Apple, and I don't own Apple anymore. I don't. But I don't want the European Union to get $13 billion of Apple shareholders' money. Would you explain to people what's going on?
Sure. And this isn't just Apple, Hugh. It's Google, it's X, it's Facebook, it's Palantir. What's happened is the European Union has lost the ability to innovate, to compete, to build the big tech companies. And so since they can't compete, they're trying to regulate and fine our companies to move part of our economy to their economy. They're basically trying to steal money from the big profitable U.S. tech companies and take that money and transfer it to the EU. So they're putting the unfair antitrust fines, digital sales taxes, tax fines against all our big companies, not billions of dollars, but tens of billions of dollars. And that money's getting sucked directly out of the U.S. economy. It's being sucked directly out of the research and development budget of these companies that are trying to keep us ahead of China in the great fight on AI and quantum computing. And it's being transferred to European social programs. It's incredible. President Trump didn't allow it to happen, but unfortunately this administration has given him a pass.
Now, we have an ambassador to the European Union, as I mentioned jokingly, that I want that job. But I really want the Trump policies vis-a-vis Europe back, which is, hey, Europe, we're paying the bill on NATO. We're protecting you from the Russians. We are doing all this to help you with the Chinese. And all you do is kick us in the rear end on our domestic companies. Do you think that the sort of the Trump policies vis-a-vis NATO is really just a policy vis-a-vis the Europeans who have grown to resent, actually, become envious of our inability, our ability to innovate and their inability to do so?
Well, they've overregulated their society, and they've got high taxes and high regulation, and as a result, there's no tech companies there. And so what they're doing, they look at us with jealousy. They see that there's, as you state, they see the growth of our big tech companies, the Facebooks and Googles and Palantirs and NVIDIAs of the world, and they want some of that money. They want some of that profit for Europe without having done anything to invest in it. What I've told people here is at least the Chinese have the decency to steal our IP and rebuild the same company in China. The Europeans don't have the decency to try and do that. They just try and take the cash through unfair fines. And you make a good point. They're doing this at the same time that we're paying for NATO. It's really unbelievable.
And we've got Macron stabbing the Israelis in the back. I just wonder what has happened to Europe. It's not, and I think we need Trump back because they figure they got a mark in the White House right now, and Kamala Harris would be an even bigger mark. Is the former president aware of the EU's predatory policies?
Oh, he knows exactly what's going on. He's told people it's going to end on day one. And look, we've seen this happen before. When Macron, who I like him, well as a friend, and he's a good president of France, but he tried to put a digital sales tax on U.S. tech companies. And this is a time that they weren't being kind to President Trump, and he wouldn't have anything of it. Trump said he actually sent me to Europe. He sent me to Berlin to meet with Macron. There's a famous picture of it with the two of us, and Macron looks like he's just been, he's about to cry because I had to tell him, if you put the digital sales tax on U.S. tech companies, we're going to have to put a 50% tariff on French champagne and wine imports into the U.S. And he wasn't happy to hear that, but guess what happened? They didn't put the digital sales tax.
Well, this is how tariffs ought to be used, to protect the national security interests, because it works.
Absolutely works, and other countries take note of it, and they know they're not going to sell French champagne, so they decide it's in their interest not to tax our tech companies. And keep in mind, the thing about President Trump was great is at the time he did this, the tech companies were not being good to him. There was censorship going on, and they weren't treating them well. But President Trump wanted to protect American companies. That was what America First was all about. If you treat American companies unfairly, whether they're favored or not favored, we're going to protect them.
Well, this is the Hamiltonian approach. I was arguing on X earlier today. Republicans are really Hamiltonians in terms of protecting America's core industry. Let me close with this, Ambassador O'Brien. You developed the letter for national security officials and military, as well as Gold Star parents, to sign. I think it's over 400 people that they will come back. If they are asked by the former president, he is elected, they will come back. Does that letter continue to circulate?
It does, and we still get people that call up and ask if they can sign it, and of course the answer is yes. And here it's not just Trump administration officials, which people need to keep in mind. It's officials from Nixon, from H.W. Bush, from Reagan, from the W. Bush administration. They all want Trump to come back, and a lot of them don't like Trump personally. I mean, some of these people left office in the Trump administration are not on good terms with the president. But they're patriots, and they recognize that a peace through strength policy for the United States is what's going to keep us safe, and they're not going to worry about a mean tweet or something the president says that they don't agree with. They want America to be safe.
Yeah, America is going to go from MAGA to CAGAS. Keep America good and safe. Robert O'Brien, always a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for checking in. I was unaware of the EU issue until you flagged it for me. I cannot believe it. And I think Donald Trump will end it within a month of taking office again. Otherwise, all of the year, Joseph Borrell as well. Gosh, that's another conversation for another day.